Well, Morrison has a very well-established track record of trashing the bilateral relationship between Australia and China. So I would see this as being in that vein. But he has no credibility in this area, and the Chinese would not take any notice of a speech he's making in Tokyo. I mean, the fact it's being made in Tokyo is itself speaks volumes. And coming at this time when the government, the Albanese government, has done a very good job at stabilising the relationship with China, you have to wonder whether there are some elements, and Morrison could be part of that, which would like to see the progress that's been made held back, and maybe to even undo some of the very good work that the Albanese government has done.
This comes as the Trade Minister, Don Farrell, has had virtual talks with his counterparts and now been invited to China. How significant is this apparent, thawing of relations?
Well, I think soaring is an overstatement. It's a stabilisation. The bilateral relationship between Australia, I doubt, will ever go back to the effervescent state it once was in some years ago. There is, I think, a hard-headed assessment of each other, but there's also a clear focus on interests. So the government has set out to stabilise the relationship. Both governments have, in fact, and I think that's progressing well. And these meetings at high level, and Penny Wong has had several meetings. As you said, the Trade Minister Farrell has had a meeting with his counterpart Wong, the Minister for Commerce, virtually. And at the end of that, it was stated very clearly by the Chinese side that Minister Farrell would be invited to China in the near future. So this is a step-by-step, measured, balanced process to get the relationship back in a place where Australia can advance its interests and also resume normal trading relations with China.
And perhaps those steps did start with Penny Wong's flying 24-hour visit to Beijing back in December, but she has recently warned of the possibility of a catastrophic war in the Indo-Pacific. How do you think Beijing would have taken those comments?
Well, they're comments that many members of the region make, and we know what the risks are. There are risks over Taiwan, there's risks on the Korean Peninsula. There are many flashpoints in our region, and I think she is just reflecting on the fact that we do live in a potentially unstable and certainly a dangerous region.
Dr. Raby, you're also involved in the coal sector as a non-executive director of Yancoal, and there are reports of Chinese companies approaching Australian coal companies to buy coal. It seems that unofficial ban is over. What implications will there be for other commodities like wine and barley?
These two commodities, though, could be addressed fairly quickly. I wrote towards the end of last year that a WTO-based mutually agreed solution could see the measures be removed without either the Chinese or the Australian side losing face or conceding ground. And that would simply be a technical understanding between the two ambassadors and the embassies in Geneva, whereby Australia agrees to drop its case against the Chinese. The Chinese declare victory because we've dropped our case, and the Chinese, for their part, agree to go back to the level of tariffs and the trading arrangements that applied before 2020 when these restrictions were brought in. I feel, though, that this is not moving, and I understand that the Trade Minister was quite attracted to that proposal, but it's become a bit more complicated, I think, because the Chinese themselves have put some issues on the table which they would like to see us address. Those issues being mainly around investment, where China feels that we run a very discriminatory investment regime against China, on anti-dumping, where we are a heavy user of anti-dumping and countervailing measures. And China would like to see us, I think, do some more around those sorts of issues. Once that happens, it is a more complex negotiation that's involved. And so I think that's one reason why we haven't seen a quicker move forward to remove the tariffs, particularly on wine and barley.
All this comes as global tensions with China remain high. How do you see the US-China relationship impacting us?
Well, I think it's impacted us substantially over the last decade nearly, and as I wrote in my book on China's grand strategy and Australia's future, it's had a huge impact on Australia-China relations. because essentially the US has put us and many of its allies in a position where we feel we need to choose between China, which is obviously a major economic partner, but also a significant player in the region, promoting security, stability and so on, and the United States, where we have very deep and long-standing security relations and alliance arrangements. And that puts our politicians under enormous pressure. It's been ever thus. It's just come to a much greater level, if you like, simply because of China's inexorable growth in the economy and its rise in power in the region. The key thing for Australia in these circumstances is not to join with the US in seeking to contain or limit China's rise. That's not an argument for us. That's one for the US, and always when there's a great power, the ascendant power and the great power will see some areas of conflict and challenge. But for the rest, it doesn't make any sense for small countries like Australia or our neighbours in the ASEAN region that don't have direct disputes with China. It doesn't make any sense for us to be siding with the dominant power to resist the ascendant power. Mind you, I think that any serious Chinese challenge to US preeminence is decades from now. But we need to be careful not to mix these things up. We need to have the US in the region. The US is a major alliance partner of Australia. It is central to our security. But you can do that and have that sort of relationship with the United States without joining the United States in pushing back on the ascendant power, which in this case is China.
Dr. Geoff Raby, thanks for your time.
My pleasure, Rachel.